All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SDG Media Zone. We're coming to you live from the UN headquarters in New York during the 80th UN General Assembly. I'm pleased to pass it to our moderator, Justin Moreland, Senior Correspondent, Time, to kick off our next session.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. We have a really, I think, interesting and important discussion. Obviously climate change is a threat to humanity, a threat to everyone on the planet today. It's also a particular threat for younger generations, for folks who are going to be most affected by this. But there's also an opportunity for intergenerational work. There's a lot to be learned from young people, and so we're going to dig into that with a very distinguished and thoughtful panel on these topics. And so I'll just briefly introduce them. Starting at my left, we have Mary Robinson, who is someone who needs no introduction, but a member of the Elders and a former president of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And then next we have Russell Reed, who is a climate activist, a part of the We Are Family Foundation lead delegate, and importantly co-architect of the NDC Youth Clause campaign. And then finally, Charity Ropati, who is on the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, an indigenous climate justice advocate and water engineer, and involved in something very important that we'll talk about in just a second, and maybe we'll just start there, actually. So Charity, I want to ask you about the ICJ, the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which, for anyone who's not aware, the ICJ issued a landmark opinion in July saying that states have an obligation to address climate change, and youth were, including you, youth were a big part of this victory. So can you just tell us a little bit about that victory and the role that youth can play in influencing global climate action going forward?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I do want to emphasize that this was work that my friends and colleagues led, specifically Pacific Island students fighting climate change. And this was a historic decision, and it's one that gave not only just me, but the entire world so much hope, because it showed that the climate crisis isn't just an environmental issue, but it's a human rights issue. It's an issue of justice, it's an issue of survival, and an issue particularly of upholding indigenous rights. And the fact that young people, particularly Pacific Island youth, were at the forefront of pushing this movement really shows that youth are incredibly effective. And particularly indigenous youth, we really carry the urgency of our lived experiences, but we also know how to organize, strategize, and really demand accountability from systems that have historically silenced us. And that particular moment really shows the world that youth, but especially that of indigenous youth, are not only leaders of tomorrow, but we're leaders now, demanding accountability from states and parties to ensure that we stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's
great. So I'm going to turn to you next, just to ask a little bit about the global ethical stocktake, which is a bit of critical conversation this year, based on the premise that we really have many of the technical solutions to address climate change, but we need this sense of ethical leadership and will. And a big part of that is convening people with different perspectives. And so I thought maybe you could just address the reasons why diversity of perspectives is important to that ethical stocktake process, and then how they might help bridge that gap between technical solutions and implementation.
Thank you, but before I answer the question, I want to support what Charity said. I actually met some of the students from Vanuatu and the other Pacific Islands, and youth generally, at an early stage. And I thought, this is incredible to have youth so ambitious, but it's a bit crazy. And wow, how important it was that the government of Vanuatu came in, that the General Assembly passed their resolution, and that we got such an important advisory opinion, which shows the real legal responsibility now of governments, and so helpful on our way to Belém and beyond. So I just wanted to affirm that. On the global ethical stocktake, I really admire the way Brazil understood, and in particular, I have to say, Minister Marina Silva, understood that we have to lift our discussion from the kind of technical, almost incremental blah, blah, blah that we were involved in so many COPs, kind of fighting corners about words and not moving things. We had to lift it to a different level by talking about the ethical and moral dimensions. And it worked. I co-led the first of them, the European one, with Marina Silva. I saw Nick Stern, Lord Stern, spend 4 of his 5 minutes speaking about justice, not economics. Everybody who participated spoke with passion. And just this afternoon, by coincidence, 4 of us, who happen to be 4 women, I'm glad to say, and indeed 4 wearing the Project Dandelion pins, that's a coincidence. 4 of us presented the regional reports from our regions. 2 of the regions couldn't be personally represented to President Lula. We were also to have had the Secretary General, but he had his conference and was tied up. And what we talked about was that this global ethical stocktake brought in a different approach. It talked about compassion. It talked about justice. It talked about a collaboration that is needed between countries, etc. What we felt is that this handing in of the official stocktakes is not the end of it. In fact, there will be another stocktake which I will be co-leading with Marina Silva to mark the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si outside Rome on the 1st of October. We will meet with very key faith leaders in the presence of Pope Leo and have that ethical, faith-based stocktake, if I can call it that. The point really is, it helps us to get into this crisis mode that leaders need to be in. It reveals, there's a lot of complaint about the shrinking of space for civil society. This has opened up space. And we have encouraged Project Dandelion, this movement of women leaders on climate and nature, has opened up a possibility of all civil society groups participating with a toolkit on our website of Project Dandelion. We want to kind of create a real momentum leading up to COP30, building on words that President Lula himself used yesterday in the General Assembly, that it has to be a COP of truth. Truth is science. And by coincidence, I also was involved this afternoon in a planetary health check of the guardians of the planetary boundaries. And it is quite alarming because it shows that of the 9 planetary boundaries, which are the ecosystems that sustain us, we are in breach of 7. Last year it was 6. This year they added the oceans. The oceans, the acidification of the oceans. This is really serious stuff. So I'm sorry I took a bit long to answer your question, but you can see why. I believe in diversity of voices. I believe in young people, indigenous, farmers, fishers, everybody, artists, filmmakers, everybody having their opportunity to contribute because it's a complex problem.
Absolutely, that was all very well said. So appreciate that. Russell, I want to turn to you now, just with your work with the ongoing work for the NDC Youth Clause. And I guess I would just maybe ask sort of broadly what the NDC Youth Clause is, right? And what would it mean for countries to embrace it and embed it in their NDCs? And then finally, like, what would that mean in terms of accountability for the countries that did do that?
Absolutely. Well, the NDC Youth Clause is a technically simple policy instrument that would represent a seismic shift in the way that young people are engaged in the implementation of national climate plans. When we look at spaces like the UN General Assembly, we see that despite a lot of small points of progress on acknowledgement of youth voices, the dynamic remains the same. Governance is predominantly led by older generations. And in the case of the UN climate negotiations in particular, we now have 3 decades of experience to show that that doesn't work. When you go back to the Rio Earth Summit, when you look at the year 1992, before I was born, many years before I was born actually, a promise was made to make Earth a secure and hospitable home for present and future generations. I am a member of that future generation, and now I'm here fighting every day for that promise to finally be kept. And I think it shows that the old way of doing things just isn't working, that change is needed, and that these future generations need to be considered leaders in the present. At the same time, all that inaction, the reason we have such challenging conditions now, much harder than they were in 1992 to get this work done. Young people are leading some of the largest social movements in history for climate action. And we've seen amazing results all around the world, in country and in international movements as well. There is a lot of power that young people bring. There's a lot of energy that comes with being native to the climate crisis, and there's a different perspective that comes with that as well. We carry, I often say, a sense of hopeful urgency, that we know things need to happen, but we're very invested in making sure that they work because we'll live in that future. So, with all of that considered, it is odd that we're still in a dynamic where action is needed, where governments are saying, we're setting these ambitions, but we're struggling to actually implement, and yet youth climate movements are still almost always positioned as agitators or to hold accountability from the outside. The Youth Clause is an opportunity directly in these new national climate plans where we're making commitments to the next decade where we really need to kind of make or break climate action here. It's an opportunity to say youth aren't just future leaders, the leaders of tomorrow. We aren't just stakeholder consultations brought in at the 11th hour. I've been in a number of those, I'm sure you have too, and a comma has never been changed. It's always too little, too late. And it's tokenistic. We aren't seen as real decision makers. We aren't given real voice in determining what our futures look like. And what's missed there is the catalytic power of working with young people as governments and as corporations and other players as well. So ultimately, what I think it gets down to when we look at the Youth Clause, we've had amazing collaboration with countries, our first signatory, the United Kingdom, recent sign-ons from countries like the Dominican Republic and Liberia. We have worked closely with them, and we've seen how challenging it is to even just set the high ambitions. That is hard work, and we really commend it. We also know that the really, really hard work begins now and begins in this next phase where those ambitions need to be met. And we know that they haven't been in many cases before. And so countries that choose to adopt the Youth Clause make a commitment to increasing their whole of society approach, not just looking at multi-sectoral collaboration, but also looking at collaboration across generations, bringing everyone into this picture, and that won't result in just more equitable climate action. I think that much is obvious, but it will also result in climate plans that are achieved more effectively, more efficiently, and with more resilience, because the people who will uphold them, our generation, will be in the room to ensure that they're seen through.
Thank you for that. I love that it's very tangible. So it's a good way to make tangible this idea, which is of course so critical, but how do we actually do that? And so we have only a few minutes left, but I would love to just hear from each of you a little bit about, we have wisdom, and experience, and also, a lot of wisdom in youth and fresh ideas. How does the world bring those two together to actually create something meaningful, to actually make progress? And we can just go across the line and hear from each of you. If you'd like to start.
Okay. I actually very much like your idea, Russell, of the Youth Clause. It fits something that the elders that Nelson Mandela brought together and that I'm part of have been talking about, which is long view leadership. Meaning, the problems that face this world, if you take the crises of climate and nature, nuclear weapons, pandemics, these are really difficult, inequality, really difficult issues. And they need long-view readership based on the science, based on the evidence, but also with a diversity of viewpoints. And we talk now about that long-view leadership and co-creation with different generations, which is very much what your youth clause would actually bring about. So, full on.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and excited for more collaboration soon. And I think my point is actually quite similar. We are so often thinking about the differences between generations, and there are many, and they're important, and we need to work through them. But when you look at the climate crisis and the conditions that brought us here, they are much older systems. We look at a lot of this, in my view, starting with colonization and through the continuation of global colonization now for centuries. You look at a huge acceleration during the Industrial Revolution. These are processes and events that have existed since long before any of us here, anyone listening, were on the earth. And so when we really look at the moment we have now, we're all inheriting a really challenging situation, but we're also at a point of clear rupture. I think that there's a need for change that everyone sees now. The front lines of the climate crisis are closing in, and we're seeing them even most recently where I was living in LA. There's really no denial anymore of the situation that we're in. The old ways of doing things for centuries now must change. In that moment of rupture, there's an opportunity for us to start really thinking. I would say not an opportunity, a moral obligation, really an ethical commitment we must make to determining what a more just and equitable future looks like, and then to figuring out how quickly we can build it. And that it will not be done by older generations alone. It won't be done by younger generations alone. There's sort of this present kinship we hold as people on the earth today to bring older knowledges together, people like the amazing person I'm sitting next to who have been doing this work for generations already. That is a ton of wisdom that we need to fight the fight today. And then bringing the energy and the enthusiasm of younger people to that fight, bringing it all together in what the Brazilian presidency for COP is calling this global mutirão. We need a whole of society approach. We need to get on the same page. And the differences between what we see or how we want to get there are a lot smaller than our mutual commitment to building that better world.
Yeah, I completely agree. Climate action needs to be intergenerational, and many of the answers that we're looking for lie in our past, in our history, and particularly in the stories of Indigenous peoples, not only from where I'm from in the Arctic, but from around the world. And something that I just want to quickly share, I know we have very little time, but one example of this is this relocation that my great-grandfather did in the 1960s without the help of local aid, state government, things like Red Cross. And he tied ropes around each of our homes and dragged our homes 11 miles northwest away from the rising water. And he made this ultimately difficult decision because of our Indigenous knowledge that was created over thousands of years. And time again, we have seen Indigenous peoples, not only from where I'm from in the Arctic, make these really incredibly difficult decisions. But it's in these stories, before mitigated retreat was even a word, we were doing these things. Why? Because we wanted to ensure the survival of future generations, and this is integral in Indigenous knowledge. And so when I think about, how do we get this done, especially amidst the climate crisis, we need to ensure that the rights of Indigenous peoples are upheld in everything that we do. When we talk about this transition to renewable energy, this just transition, we have to ensure that these things do not infringe on our rights as Indigenous peoples, because we have been stewarding this land, honestly, really before it became a trend, because this is our home. We love we love the earth. And something that was always shared with me is that we need to listen to the stories of those who have always loved their land, whether that's Indigenous peoples in the Arctic to those in the Pacific Islands. So I just want to end with that, especially as we approach Belém, COP30, which is broadly known as the Indigenous COP, right? We need to ensure that our rights as Indigenous peoples are upheld and that we have the right to free, prior, and informed consent amidst these discussions.
Could I just reinforce what Charity has been saying about Indigenous wisdom? I have listened and I have learned. What we forget in the non-Indigenous world, in the so-called modern world, is that we are nature. We are part of nature. We are destroying ourselves when we abuse the earth as we have been doing and extract beyond any boundaries And we need Indigenous women to be, wisdom to be front and center, as we need youth, as we need, we need these diversity of voices. I think it's good that the conference will be in the Amazon in Belém. It won't be easy for anybody, including those organizing it in Belém, but it will show us. And I hope that this will be the wisdom, that we are nature. We're not separate from nature. We don't control nature. If we go on the way we're going, nature will become, we will get the tipping point backlashes of nature. Nature at the moment is our friend, but we're abusing our friend. We're abusing ourselves, and we need to learn that.
Well said. I'll just close this out here and say, Russell mentioned this phrase, the point of rupture, which I found interesting. The thing I keep saying to people, I've been saying for years, is out of all of these really big challenges, there's an opportunity to create something better. And it's taken too long, but hopefully we keep that in mind with all the things that we're discussing here: intergenerational collaboration, nature, Indigenous understanding of nature. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to this excellent panel. It's a great discussion.
Thank you very much.